The small white bakery box felt impossibly heavy in Sarah Miller's hands, its weight not from the single slice of vanilla cake inside, but from the 12 years of secrets it was meant to unlock. Her heart, a frantic hummingbird against her ribs, beat a rhythm of hopeful anticipation. 12 years, an entire lifetime of building a quiet, unassuming existence, while another, infinitely more powerful life, hummed beneath the surface, waiting. Today was the day. The day Robert would finally see her. All of her. The elevator ascended with a soft, expensive whisper, climbing 35 floors into the Manhattan sky. Each chime marking a floor was a countdown to a new beginning. She pictured his face, the initial surprise, the confusion, then the slow dawning, breathtaking awe as she laid out the truth of her $12 billion empire, an empire built in the shadows of their modest life. It wasn't about the money. It was about finally standing beside him as an equal, a true partner. The simple cake, a perfect echo of the one they'd shared on their first anniversary in their tiny walk-up apartment, was the bridge between that hopeful past and this spectacular future. Stepping onto the plush carpet of the executive floor, she bypassed the receptionist's desk with a familiar, gentle smile. A sweet surprise. That's all this was meant to be. Her hand, trembling just slightly, pushed open the heavy, dark oak door to Robert Maxwell's office. And the world stopped. It wasn't the silence that hit her first, but the sound. A woman's laughter, light and careless, a sound that didn't belong in the sacred space of their anniversary. Robert sat in his custom leather armchair, the one she had spent months saving for as a birthday gift years ago. Draped across his lap, a woman in a crimson dress that screamed of everything Sarah was not. Loud, expensive, demanding attention. Their hands were tangled together, Robert's thumb stroking the back of the other woman's, an act of casual intimacy that was like a physical blow to Sarah's chest. The white bakery box slipped from her numb fingers. It didn't crash. It fell with a soft, sickening thud onto the polished marble floor, the perfect square of white cardboard popping open to reveal the small, pristine slice of vanilla cake, now tragically ruined. The sound, so small in the cavernous office, was a sonic boom in the sudden, sharp silence. The laughter had died. 2 pairs of eyes, one pair wide with shock, the other laced with cruel amusement, snapped towards her. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't gasp. A terrifying, glacial calm descended over her, freezing the very air in her lungs. If your heart is also pounding with the shock of this betrayal, leave a like to show you're standing with Sarah. Because in that moment, she wasn't just a wife, she was a force of nature gathering its strength. Her gaze, clear and unwavering, locked onto Robert's. His face, usually flushed with the easy confidence of a man born into power, had drained of all color. He looked pathetic, small. She took a step forward, her sensible heels making no sound on the thick rug. Then another. She walked past the ruined cake, past the woman who was now scrambling to sit up, and stopped directly in front of his massive, imposing desk. A desk that was, in reality, a monument to her silent, unacknowledged genius. Slowly, deliberately, her hand rose to her left ring finger. She twisted the platinum band, a simple, elegant piece she had purchased herself, because his family heirloom felt too cold. It slid off her finger with ease. She held it between her thumb and forefinger for a single charged second before placing it precisely in the center of his leather desk blotter. It shone under the recessed lighting, a tiny silver indictment. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a coming avalanche. The real chapter, she said, her eyes never leaving his, begins now. But to understand the devastating precision of the storm that was about to break, one had to go back 3 weeks, to a quiet night in their suburban New England home. Robert was asleep upstairs, his deep, untroubled breaths a testament to his ignorance. Downstairs, in a small, soundproofed office hidden behind a false bookshelf, Sarah Miller was not a wife. She was a monarch presiding over a global financial kingdom. 6 monitors glowed in the darkness, casting an ethereal blue light on her focused face. They displayed a dizzying array of market data, proprietary algorithms, and encrypted communication channels. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a fluid, silent grace. executing a series of trades that would shift fortunes on the other side of the world. She wasn't gambling. She was conducting an orchestra. A small, $500 million acquisition of a biotech firm in Singapore. A subtle strategic short on a floundering European tech giant. Every move was a brushstroke in a masterpiece of wealth generation she had been painting for over a decade. It had started small, with $1,000 she'd saved from waiting tables in college, a sum Robert had once laughed about. He never asked where the down payment for their first home came from, or how she always found the money for his little ventures that invariably failed. He just accepted it, assuming it was the result of her frugal little coupons and clever budgeting. He saw her as simple, reliable, safe. He had no idea he was sleeping next to the architect of his entire reality. Just last week, Robert had patted her on the head, literally patted her on the head like a dog, after she'd suggested a minor diversification in his portfolio at Maxwell Holdings. "Leave the big numbers to me, honey," Robert had said with a condescending smile. "You just worry about making sure we have enough milk." She had simply smiled back, a placid, agreeable smile, while silently finalizing a deal that earned her more in 7 minutes than Maxwell Holdings would clear in an entire fiscal year. Her original plan had been born of love, a deep and tragically misplaced love. She had rehearsed the anniversary reveal 100 times in her mind. She would sit him down, not with charts and graphs, but with a story. The story of them. The story of a woman who loved him so much, she built a fortress to protect their future, brick by invisible brick. She wanted to present her fortune not as a trophy, but as a gift. "This is for us," she would have said. "Now we can finally build something real together." She had dreamed of the relief on his face, the shedding of the pressure he carried to live up to his father's name. She wanted to set him free. The irony was a blade twisting in her gut. She had made herself small to fit into his world, believing his comfort was more important than her truth. She had hidden her brilliance, muted her power, all for a man who was looking for something shiny and new in the middle of the day. Now, standing in the doorway of his office, the ghost of that loving intention turned to ash in her mouth. She turned her back on the scene, on Robert, frozen in his chair, on the woman in the crimson dress, on the shattered symbol of their life on the floor, and walked away. The meek, unassuming Sarah Miller, who had entered the building 30 minutes ago, had just died on the 35th floor. The woman who walked out into the cold, unforgiving light of the city was someone else entirely. She was no longer just the secret architect of an empire. She was its avenging angel, and the thunderous beat of her heart was no longer a rhythm of hope, but the slow, steady drum of war. The sterile quiet of the service department was a world away from the cluttered warmth of her marital home. Here, there were no photographs on the walls, no half-finished books on the nightstand, no scent of Robert's cologne lingering in the air. There was only the low hum of a server rack hidden in a closet, and the soft glow of 3 monitors casting an ethereal blue light on Sarah Miller's face. The pain was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone lodged in her chest where her heart used to be. Yet, her hands were steady as they moved across the keyboard. Her resolve, forged in the fires of a 12-year betrayal, was now a shield of unbreakable steel. Each keystroke was a deliberate, measured act, a single soldier being dispatched in a war Robert Maxwell didn't even know had been declared. She took a sip of black coffee, the bitterness a welcome jolt. For days, she had allowed herself the solitary luxury of grief, replaying the scene in his office, the shattered cake, the woman's surprised gasp, the dawning horror in Robert's eyes. But grief was a currency she could no longer afford to spend. Now she traded only in logic, strategy, and consequence. On the center screen, a complex web of financial data shifted and reformed under her command. These were the foundations of Robert's world, the pillars of Maxwell Holdings, and she knew every single weakness, every hairline fracture, because she had been the one to secretly reinforce them for over a decade. Miles away in a sun-drenched corner office that now felt vaguely empty, Robert Maxwell swirled amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. He was annoyed, not panicked, not yet. He had called Sarah's mother, her sister, even that one friend from college whose name he could barely remember. No one had heard from her. He lounged back in his chair, the one Sarah had picked out, and explained the situation to Tiffany, the woman from his lap, who was now examining her manicure with bored indifference. "She's just being dramatic," Robert said, taking a long swallow of his scotch. "Sarah gets these moods. She'll spend a few days feeling sorry for herself, probably buy a new set of curtains, and then she'll be back. It was our anniversary, after all. Women get sentimental about these things." Tiffany shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture. "Whatever you say, Rob. Just make sure she's not back before we go to the Hamptons this weekend." Robert chuckled, the sound echoing with an arrogance he didn't know was already obsolete. He was a Maxwell. His life was built on bedrock, inherited and unshakable. A minor marital spat was nothing more than a passing cloud. He had no idea that Sarah, his quiet, simple Sarah, was the very architect of that bedrock, and she had just activated a series of controlled demolitions. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday morning. Robert was in a board meeting, presenting a rosy projection for the next quarter, when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his top account manager. He ignored it. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again, and again. With an irritated sigh, he excused himself. "What is it, Mark?" He snapped into the phone. "It's Sterling Thorne." Mark's voice was tight with anxiety. "They're pulling their portfolio, all of it, effective immediately." Robert felt a jolt, as if the floor had dropped an inch. Sterling Thorne was their oldest client, a legacy account passed down from his father. It was worth over $80 million. What? Why? Did they give a reason? Just a strategic realignment. That's all they'd say. "Robert, this came out of nowhere. We had dinner with their CEO last month. He was thrilled with our performance." "It's Callahan," Robert muttered, his mind immediately jumping to his chief rival. "He must have undercut us. That son of a bitch. Fine, we'll weather it. Call a meeting. We'll double down on our other key accounts." But there were fewer key accounts to double down on. The next day, a promising tech venture they had poured 7 figures into suddenly folded. A press release cited unforeseen regulatory hurdles. Robert saw it as monumentally bad luck. He never once considered that the unforeseen hurdles were the result of an anonymous, meticulously documented tip-off to the SEC, sent from a triple-encrypted server by a woman who knew exactly where the company had cut corners. From her sterile command center, Sarah watched the news reports. She felt no thrill, no rush of victory. There was only a cold, grim sense of necessity, like a surgeon excising a tumor. She was not destroying a man. She was correcting a market imbalance, a cosmic error. She was reclaiming the energy, the intellect, and the capital she had poured into him, believing he was a partner when he had only ever seen her as an accessory. If you are feeling the chill of Sarah's quiet power and believe that true strength is often underestimated, leave a like to show your support for her journey. It was a journey that was only just beginning. The world Robert inhabited, a world of handshaken deals in smoke-filled rooms and fortunes built on handshakes and family names, was a fragile ecosystem. Sarah's world was one of algorithms, quantum data analysis, and silent, global transactions that occurred in the space of a nanosecond. He was playing checkers. She was playing a form of three-dimensional chess he couldn't even perceive. The disparity was brutal. While Robert spent his evenings at exclusive restaurants, projecting an aura of unbothered success to quell the nervous whispers that had started to circulate, Sarah was liquidating assets, rerouting capital, and acquiring shell corporations that would, one by one, swallow his remaining clients. One afternoon, seeking a moment's respite from the screens, Sarah found herself walking through a small, unassuming park downtown. She stopped in front of a simple wooden bench, its green paint faded and peeling. It was here 10 years ago that she and Robert had sat, sharing a hot dog because it was all they could afford for lunch. He had been animated, full of dreams about transforming his father's modest firm into an empire. "With you by my side, Sarah," he had said, his eyes shining with a sincerity she now knew was a performance. "Anything is possible. You're my secret weapon. You see things nobody else does." She had believed him. She had believed her quiet strength was their shared asset. A single tear, hot and unexpected, finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. It was a eulogy for the man he never was, for the dream she had nurtured alone. He had been right about one thing. She was a secret weapon. He just never realized she had her own arsenal, and he had just become her primary target. Straightening her shoulders, she turned and walked away from the bench, leaving the ghost of their shared past to fade with the afternoon sun. Back in his office, the pressure was mounting. The whispers were now murmurs. The murmurs were becoming concerned questions from his board. Robert Maxwell, for the first time in his privileged life, felt the icy grip of real fear. He was losing control, and he didn't know why. He saw shadows and enemies everywhere, in his competitors, in the market, in his own staff. The one place he never looked was at the memory of his unassuming wife placing her wedding band on his desk. That event was filed away in his mind under personal drama, completely separate from the impenetrable fortress of his business life. It was in this state of quiet desperation that the invitation arrived. It was delivered by a special courier, its envelope thick and creamy, the calligraphy exquisite. It was an invitation to the annual Black Diamond Gala, the most exclusive, high-powered event on the New York City social calendar. For Robert, it felt like a divine intervention, a lifeline. In a room full of the city's most powerful people, he could project strength, network, and crush the damaging rumors with a single confident smile. It was a chance to prove to the world and to himself that he was still Robert Maxwell, a titan of industry. Holding the invitation, a genuine smile spread across his face for the first time in weeks. He would go. He would reclaim his narrative. He would show them all. He was entirely blissfully unaware that the gala's new anonymous benefactor, the one whose massive donation had secured her the keynote address, was his wife. And Sarah had her own plans for that night, a narrative she was preparing to deliver on a stage far grander than he could possibly imagine. The hum of the servers was a low, constant thrum, the only sound in the minimalist glass-walled office high above a city that was not New York. Here there was no polished marble or inherited oak, only steel, concrete, and screens displaying rivers of data in green and red. Sarah Miller sat at the center of this web, her posture perfect, her focus absolute. The chaos she was unleashing felt a world away, an abstract concept represented by cascading numbers and encrypted messages. Robert's world was not just unraveling, it was being systematically unstitched, thread by painstaking thread, by the same hands that had once sewn on his buttons and packed his lunch. It had started with a whisper, an anonymous tip to the Securities and Exchange Commission about irregularities in Maxwell Holdings' quarterly reports. A whisper Sarah herself had authored, embedding just enough verifiable truth to be irresistible. Now that whisper had become a roar. On Robert's end it manifested as a formal letter, its cold bureaucratic language a stark contrast to the panic it induced. An investigation, audits, a freeze on key trading accounts pending review. Robert had stormed into his office that morning, his face a mask of thunderous disbelief, convinced a corporate rival, perhaps the notoriously aggressive Julian Croft, was behind the attack. He spent hours on the phone shouting at his legal team, demanding they find the source, demanding they make it stop. He never once considered the quiet woman who had organized his tax documents with meticulous care for 12 years. He couldn't possibly fathom that she knew every loophole he'd exploited, every corner he'd cut, because she was the one who had quietly advised him on how to navigate them in the first place. While Robert fought phantoms, Sarah initiated Phase 2, a carefully timed series of coded sell orders, executed through a dozen different shell corporations across 3 continents, targeted the very holding companies that gave Maxwell Holdings its illusion of liquidity. It was a financial house of cards, and Sarah knew precisely which cards to pull first. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Lines of credit he had relied on for years suddenly tightened. Lenders who had once courted him now spoke of risk assessment and exposure. The calls Robert made became less about outrage and more about pleading. The arrogant certainty that had defined him began to fray at the edges, replaced by a gnawing, unfamiliar anxiety. His world, once a solid, predictable thing he could command, had become treacherous and fluid, the ground shifting beneath his feet with every new devastating financial report. In the midst of this controlled demolition, Sarah prepared for her coronation. Her transformation was not just an external one, though that was part of it. a discreet team of stylists, designers, and consultants, the best her limitless funds could procure, came and went from the secure penthouse suite she now called home. One afternoon, a gown was presented. It was the one. Crafted from a fabric that seemed woven from starlight and shadow, it clung to her form not with ostentation, but with an undeniable authority. As she stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, she did not see the woman who used to wonder if a new dress was too extravagant. She saw a queen surveying her realm. "It's perfect, Miss Miller," her assistant, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman named Evelyn, said softly. Sarah touched the cool fabric at her collarbone. "It's a statement, Evelyn, not a dress." Her gaze in the mirror was steady, unflinching. The meekness had been burned away, leaving behind something harder, brighter. She was no longer hiding. She was simply choosing the precise moment to be seen. Her ambition, which she had for so long tempered and disguised, was now a palpable force in the room. This was the woman who could command boardrooms and dismantle empires before breakfast. This was the woman Robert had never bothered to look for. The cracks in Robert Maxwell's persona began to show. His affair, once a thrilling symbol of his power and desirability, now felt like a hollow, tedious obligation. The woman's laughter, which had once seemed so carefree, now grated on his frayed nerves. He started making excuses, cancelling dates. The edifice of his life was crumbling, and he found himself in the strange and terrifying position of being utterly alone. In the dead of night, staring at the ceiling of his too-empty penthouse, his thoughts would drift, unbidden, to Sarah. He remembered her calm, her quiet efficiency, the way she could make sense of the most complicated problems with a few simple words. He didn't miss her in a romantic sense. His ego wouldn't allow it. Instead, he missed her as a drowning man misses solid ground. He missed his anchor. This desperation drove him to do something he hadn't done in weeks. He called Clara, a mutual friend who had always been closer to Sarah. His voice on the phone was strained, an awkward attempt at casualness. "Clara, hi, it's Robert," he began. "Listen, I was just wondering, have you heard from Sarah? I've tried her cell a few times, but it just goes to voicemail." There was a cool pause on the other end of the line. "She's fine, Robert. She's just busy." Clara's tone was polite but distant, a perfectly constructed wall. Sarah had prepped her, of course, asking only that she tell the simple, unadorned truth. "Busy? Busy with what?" Robert pressed, a hint of his old demanding tone creeping in. "Is she okay? Is she with someone?" "She's taking care of her business," Clara replied, her voice leaving no room for further questions. "I have to go, Robert. I hope you figure things out." The line went dead, leaving Robert holding his phone, the silence in his ear echoing the vast emptiness of his life. He felt a chill creep up his spine. Her business? What business? Sarah's business was running the household, managing their social calendar. The thought was so absurd he almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, a tiny, terrifying question mark, pierced through his thick wall of arrogance. The date of the Black Diamond Gala loomed, a glittering spectacle on the horizon of his ruin. The invitation, which had once felt like a lifeline, a chance to project strength and stability to a skeptical society, now felt like a summons to his own execution. Yet, he had to go. To not appear would be an admission of defeat, a confirmation of the whispers that were now circulating through Wall Street like a contagion. Robert Maxwell was finished. The night before the gala, Sarah stood before her wall of screens. The data streams told a complete story. Maxwell Holdings was technically insolvent, propped up by a single, massive and anonymous line of credit from an offshore institution. An institution she owned. Every asset, every share, every last dollar was leveraged against that line. Robert was a king ruling a kingdom of ghosts, and he didn't even know it. Evelyn stood beside her holding a tablet. "All subsidiary accounts are ready for the margin call. The second you give the word, the entire structure will collapse. The system will auto-file for bankruptcy liquidation by morning." Sarah's gaze was fixed on a single blinking green light on the main screen. It represented the final thread holding Robert's world together. All it would take was a single command to sever it. The tension in the room was electric, a silent storm about to break. This was the point of no return. tomorrow, in front of the most powerful people in the country, she would not just reveal her new self. She would preside over the public dismantling of her old life and the man who had defined it. She would be both the architect of his ruin and the herald of her own ascendance. She took a slow, steadying breath, the air tasting of ozone and victory. Her finger hovered over the secure biometric keypad on her console. She looked at Evelyn, a small, serene smile touching her lips. The same kind of smile she'd had on her face 12 years ago when she'd said, "I do." "It's time," Sarah said, her voice a calm, clear bell ringing in the quiet room. She pressed her thumb to the scanner. The blinking green light turned to a solid, final red. Let the real chapter begin. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a galaxy of glittering crystal and whispered fortunes. Chandeliers, like frozen supernovas, cast a brilliant, unforgiving light on the city's elite, illuminating the facets of diamonds and the sharp edges of competitive smiles. Robert Maxwell stood near a marble column at the edge of this universe, a ghost clinging to the fringes of a world that had already forgotten him. His tuxedo, once a symbol of his station, now felt like a costume, hanging slightly too loose on a frame diminished by months of relentless stress. He nursed a glass of champagne he hadn't touched, the bubbles dying a slow, unnoticed death. People's eyes slid past him, a polite but firm dismissal. He was no longer a player, he was a cautionary tale, a spectre at the feast. He was watching the grand entrance, a masochistic ritual of observing the power and influence he no longer possessed, when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a loud change, but a subtle, magnetic pull. A hush began near the ornate double doors, rippling through the crowd like a silent shockwave. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Robert followed their collective gaze, and his breath caught in his throat, a sharp, painful hitch. There, framed by the grand archway, stood Sarah. It was Sarah, but it was not the Sarah he knew. This was not the woman who wore simple cotton dresses and found joy in the scent of baking bread. This was not the quiet, unassuming partner who had managed their modest household budget with a gentle, almost invisible hand. The woman in the doorway was a celestial event. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that seemed to have captured the night sky, shimmering with every subtle movement as if woven from liquid starlight. Around her neck lay a river of diamonds, a breathtaking cascade of fire and ice that caught the light from 1,000 angles and threw it back, blindingly brilliant. It wasn't the opulence that stunned him, though. It was her, the way she held herself, with a serene, unshakable confidence that seemed to emanate from her very core. Her smile was calm, her gaze clear and direct. She wasn't entering a room, she was taking possession of it. Robert felt the champagne glass tremble in his hand. A wave of cold dread washed over him, so potent it made his knees weak. The woman he had dismissed, the wife he had so carelessly betrayed and discarded, was not just surviving, she was reigning. He watched, frozen, as she moved into the ballroom. She didn't walk, she glided. The city's most powerful figures, CEOs, senators, matriarchs of old money dynasties, parted before her, their expressions a mixture of awe, respect, and a hint of fear. They approached her, not the other way around. His mind reeled, a chaotic slideshow of memories crashing against the impossible reality before him. Sarah, patiently explaining a complex financial article he'd brushed off as boring. Sarah, quietly suggesting a small, obscure stock that had later tripled in value, a tip he'd claimed as his own shrewd insight. Sarah working late into the night on her laptop, which he'd assumed was for her quaint little book club or online recipes. The sheer, colossal scale of his blindness hit him with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been a fool, an arrogant, blind, pathetic fool. She was making her way toward the main stage. Pausing graciously to exchange a few words with a banking magnate Robert had spent years trying to get a meeting with. She passed within 10 feet of him, her light perfume, a scent he'd never known, something complex and expensive, drifting in her wake. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met his. There was no hatred in them, no anger. There was nothing at all. It was the detached, fleeting glance one might give a piece of furniture, and it was more devastating than any scream or accusation could ever have been. In that single, empty look, he understood his new place in her world. He didn't have one. A moment later, the evening's host, a man with a booming voice and a national profile, stepped to the microphone. "And now," he announced, his voice filled with genuine reverence, "it is my distinct honor to introduce a woman who has not only redefined the landscape of modern finance, but has done so with unparalleled integrity and vision. Our keynote speaker and this year's recipient of the Black Diamond Philanthropy Award, Ms. Sarah Miller." The name echoed in Robert's skull. Ms. Sarah Miller, not Mrs. Robert Maxwell. The name was hers. The honor was hers. The world was hers. Thunderous applause filled the ballroom as Sarah ascended the small set of stairs to the podium. She placed her hands lightly on its sides, her posture poised and elegant, and waited for the ovation to subside. When silence finally fell, it was absolute. Every eye, every ounce of attention in that vast, glittering space was fixed on her. "Thank you," she began, her voice calm and clear, amplified just enough to fill every corner of the room without sounding forced. It was the same voice that had once asked him if he wanted coffee. Now it commanded the attention of titans. "It is a tremendous honor to be here tonight, among so many brilliant minds and generous hearts." She spoke for a few minutes about the importance of philanthropy, about creating opportunities where none existed. Her words were eloquent, intelligent, and heartfelt. Robert listened, his heart pounding a funeral drum against his ribs. It was all a prelude. He knew it. The air grew thick with anticipation, as if the entire room sensed this was more than just a speech. Then her tone shifted. A new personal intensity entered her voice. "For far too long," she said, her eyes sweeping across the rapt audience, "some of us have been taught to be quiet. We have been conditioned to shrink, to make ourselves smaller, to fit into rooms, into relationships, into worlds that were never truly built to contain our full measure." A ripple of understanding, of profound recognition, passed through the powerful women in the room. They leaned forward, their gazes locked on Sarah. "We have apologized for our ambition," she continued, her voice rising with a quiet, undeniable force. "We have apologized for our intelligence, for our insights, for our inherent strength. We have hidden our greatest assets behind veils of modesty and deference, believing it was the only way to be accepted, to be loved." Her gaze, which had been moving across the faces in the crowd, finally stopped. It found Robert, standing alone by his marble column, and it locked onto him. The vast distance of the ballroom collapsed into an intimate, suffocating space between the two of them. He was pinned by her stare, a specimen under a microscope. He could not look away. She held his eyes, her expression unreadable but her voice unwavering, as she delivered the final, crushing blow, a declaration not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been made to feel small. "But no more," she stated, her voice resonating with the clarity of a bell tolling the end of an era. And then, with all the power she had forged in silence, with all the dignity she had earned in secret, she said, "Never again will we apologize for being great." For a heartbeat, there was a profound, echoing silence. It was the kind of silence that follows a fundamental truth being spoken aloud for the first time. Then the ballroom erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. A standing ovation led by the most influential people in the city. It was a wave of sound, of validation, of celebration that crashed over Robert, drowning him. Each clap was a judgment. Each cheer was a testament to his failure. He stared at Sarah, now bathed in the adoring light of the stage, a queen receiving the acclamation of her court. The face he saw was the same one that had looked at him with love over 12 years of anniversary dinners. But now, he finally saw what was behind it. The power, the genius, the throne. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, the very image of a man realizing, far too late, that he had spent more than a decade sleeping beside a titan, a formidable force of nature, a queen. And in his blind, unforgivable arrogance, he had never once bothered to see the magnificent throne upon which she was already seated. The fallout from the Black Diamond Gala was not a slow burn, it was an explosion. By morning, Sarah Miller's name was on the lips of every newscaster from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Headlines screamed from digital billboards in Times Square, "The ghost of Maxwell Holdings, Sarah Miller, the $12 billion wife, and from the kitchen to the throne, the unseen architect of an empire." The story was irresistible, a cocktail of betrayal, hidden genius, and spectacular public redemption. The market reacted with brutal efficiency. Shares of Maxwell Holdings, already teetering, became worthless before the opening bell. The company, once a symbol of inherited prestige, was officially declared insolvent by noon. Robert Maxwell experienced the apocalypse not from his 35th floor office, but from the stale, borrowed air of a friend's spare bedroom in Queens. The tailored suits hung in the closet like ghosts of a man who no longer existed. He sat on the edge of a lumpy mattress, wearing a faded university sweatshirt, clutching a cheap ceramic mug of instant coffee. The television screen was a portal to his own personal hell, replaying the moment over and over. Sarah bathed in light, her voice a calm, resonant force, her eyes finding his in the crowd. He saw what the world now saw, not just a woman, but a titan. The humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He had spent 12 years looking at a masterpiece and seeing only the plain canvas it was painted on. He hadn't just lost a fortune, he had discarded a universe, and the chilling, agonizing truth was that he had done it to himself. His phone, once a constant stream of calls from influential friends and fawning associates, was silent. His name was no longer a key to the city. It was a cautionary tale, a punchline whispered over expensive lunches he would never again attend. Meanwhile, Sarah was not celebrating. There were no champagne bottles, no victory parties. She stood in her new office, a space of minimalist elegance high above Central Park, the morning sun spilling across the polished concrete floors. The city unfolded below her, a kingdom she had conquered in silence, but the victory felt hollow in a way she hadn't anticipated. The demolition of Robert's life hadn't brought her joy, only a profound, quiet sense of finality. It wasn't about revenge, she realized. It had never truly been about revenge, it was about survival. It was about carving out a space for her own existence in a world, in a marriage. That had demanded her invisibility. The gala had not been an act of war, it had been a declaration of independence. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Anya, whom Sarah had personally recruited from a community college scholarship program, entered softly. "Ms. Miller, the board of the Women's Entrepreneurial Fund is on the line. They've unanimously voted to accept your proposal." Sarah turned from the window, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "Thank you, Anya. Put them through." This was the next chapter, not the tearing down, but the building up. Over the next few weeks, she poured her energy, her intellect, and her billions into a new venture, the Miller Foundation for Unseen Potential. Its mission was simple, yet revolutionary: to find and fund the brilliant minds the world so often overlooked, the single mothers with groundbreaking ideas sketched on napkins, the immigrants with PhDs driving for rideshare companies, the quiet geniuses in overlooked towns who, like her, had been taught to make themselves small. She wasn't just writing checks, she was building an ecosystem, providing mentorship, resources, and above all, the validation she had been denied for so long. She became a legend, not for the empire she had secretly built, but for the countless others she was now building in the light. Months bled into a new season. Autumn's crisp air gave way to the biting cold of winter. Robert Maxwell found a job. It was anonymous work, driving a delivery van for a high-end catering company, the kind that used to service his parties. He wore a simple navy blue uniform, his name Rob, stitched over the breast pocket. He was invisible again, but this time, his invisibility was not a choice. He moved through the city he once owned like a phantom, delivering canapes and champagne to the very buildings where he once closed multi-million-dollar deals. The anonymity was both a prison and a strange, painful relief. One frigid December afternoon, his route took him to a sleek glass tower on the Upper East Side. He was hauling a crate of sparkling water toward the service entrance when he saw her. Sarah was exiting the building's main lobby, surrounded by a small group of impeccably dressed men and women, all listening to her with rapt attention. She was not wearing a starlight gown, but a simple, powerful cashmere coat, her hair pulled back, her face clear and focused. She looked at peace. As she turned toward her waiting car, her gaze drifted across the street, across the flow of yellow cabs and hurried pedestrians. For 1/100th of a second, their eyes met. There was no shock in her expression, no pity, no triumph. There was only a quiet, settled recognition, a calm acknowledgement of a life she had once lived. It was the look one gives to a distant memory, a chapter long since read and closed. In that fleeting moment, Robert saw everything he had lost, not the money or the status, but the chance to stand beside that incredible, formidable force of nature as an equal. The weight of his 12-year blunder crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He flinched, breaking the gaze, and she was gone, stepping into her car and disappearing into the rhythm of the city. He was left on the sidewalk, a ghost in a navy blue uniform, holding a crate of water for a party he wasn't invited to. Later that evening, Sarah stood on the terrace of her penthouse, looking out at the glittering tapestry of New York City. On a small table beside her sat a single, perfect vanilla cupcake. She picked it up, the memory of another cake, shattered on a marble floor, a distant echo. She took a bite, the simple sweetness a reminder not of a broken past, but of a future she had built with her own 2 hands. She had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all. True power wasn't about dominating others or proving them wrong. It was about the unshakable, quiet confidence of knowing your own worth, even when no one else in the world can see it. And in the silent, powerful hum of the city that was now hers to shape, Sarah Miller finally understood that the greatest empires were not built on stock prices or revenge, but on the unshakable foundation of a soul that refused ever again to apologize for its own greatness.